All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody, to the Gunner Technology Livestream, a weekly tech talk for non-techies and techies alike. I'm your host, Barry Merkins. With me is CEO of Gunner Technology, Cody Swan. What's up, Cody?
Well, just scrambling to put together another proposal. These things are tough sometimes. These things are tough.
Sometimes, he says. Those things, they're bears. They really are.
I mean, well, and this one is kind of ridiculous. This is the one for that Decatur, Decatur, where they're like, our budget will be pretty modest, and then they literally ask for just about everything you could possibly ask for technologically in a website. So it's interesting sometimes.
It's a challenge. It's a definite challenge. Yes. So we're a little bit late, so we'll dive right into it. We have our Country Shore giveaway winner. Country Shore is a lifestyle brand for anyone who loves the outdoors. Visit them at countryshoreoutfitters.com. And the winner this week is Mike G from Miami, Florida. So, Mike, you've got a Country Shore hat coming your way, along with copies of our ebooks. So anyone who didn't win this week, go ahead and hop on our Facebook page, sign up for the Country Shore giveaway, and answer our question of the week. What was the question of the week this past week, Cody?
The question of the week of the past week. Why didn't you? Well, we need to start with the question of the week for this week, because that's what I always have pulled right up, and then I have to scroll down. One of these days, I'm going to learn. One of these days, I'm gonna implement a bot that's gonna just read it to me. Come on, now Facebook's not loading. Which that's the question of the week this week. But the question of the week last week was, how old were you when you got your first smartphone?
What were the range of the answers that we got?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we have kind of a young audience, so it was kind of like 12, 18. Yeah, it's pretty young. I see a few older replies in there. 36.
I can't imagine what life would have been like if I had a smartphone at 12.
I
remember it being nice to be able to sort of disappear too, for periods of time.
Yeah, yeah.
Like everyone is constantly reachable now.
Yeah, and not only are they reachable, but they're expected to be reachable at all times, which is just the worst.
So what is the question of the week for next week?
The question of the week for next week is, have you quit Facebook in the past year or plan to do so? Have you quit or plan to quit Facebook in the past year or this year? Excuse me, this year.
Not necessarily quit Facebook before this year.
Right. Just basically, have you quit or are you planning to quit Facebook? And the reason I ask that is because I've been reading articles about how many, that almost half of users under the age of 22 have deactivated or deleted their account.
Is that right?
Yeah, apparently young people are mass exiting Facebook, and there was a big, it sounded big, but it wasn't that big when I looked into it. It was like in the past month, 1 million Europeans deleted their Facebook accounts, which 1 million really isn't that big of a number when you're talking about all of Europe, I guess. But it is in the news, so if I'm going to I'll let the news media wag our tail, wag our dog.
Did they say why they were leaving Facebook? The kids? Does it have to do with the data stuff or privacy stuff? I think
they're just heading. I think that from what I was reading, it seems like it's more like exactly what you said. It's like people are always in their business when they're on Facebook. And so they basically are moving from Facebook to Instagram. So, which Facebook owns Instagram. So good job, guys.
Just kind of a sideways move there.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of the content too with the younger generation, and this is speaking as an old man who doesn't really understand the younger generation, but it seems like a lot of the content is extremely short content. Like Vine was super popular back in the day, but just in general, Facebook doesn't seem to be the medium for, memed out short videos that are, just like little snippets of hilarity.
No, it's like, and again, I haven't had a real Facebook account in some time now, but when I left Facebook, it was becoming pretty much all political or like the total opposite of just funny memes and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, it seems to be taking itself a little too seriously these days.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, I'm definitely one of those people who's left in the past year. I still have like a fake account so I can manage like pages, because you have to have an account to manage pages and stuff like that. But I haven't had, and I guess I haven't deleted my account. I deactivated it.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Okay.
Definitely way back in the day.
Yeah. So it's been deactivated for, I think it's like 6 months now.
Do you know what your ID is, by the way?
My ID.
Because like they used to show your ID in the URL way back when.
Oh yeah,
I think mine was like 17,340 something.
Mine was pretty low because I joined Facebook. I joined Facebook right when UF was first allowed to.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was pretty low. I don't think I saved it, but I do remember seeing it at one point, thinking that was pretty low, but I don't remember what it was.
Exactly. Remember that being a badge of honor, but in hindsight, really, it's completely meaningless. But the opposite of completely meaningless is today's topic, which, just to remind people what we're doing here, we're doing a 10-part series on for entrepreneurs, basically how to build your app or build your dream app out. So the first 3 episodes were a lot about the planning stages, the funding stages, and we're sort of getting into the nitty-gritty here with the 4th episode, where we're actually talking about how you build your app, how you start building the app out. So we've done sort of a little role-playing scenario where I've sort of played the entrepreneur, Cody's played the Gunner Technology representative. We'll do that today, but there's going to be less back and forth, I think, because the how to build your app is largely going to be coming from our side. So, Cody, do you want to just sort of dive in and talk people through, I guess, how we start helping folks build their app ideas out?
Yeah, so I think this touches on something that we were looking back on planning, because building is sort of goes hand in hand with the planning step, and it's sort of like instead of a linear progression, it's more of a circular progression. So like instead of going like this, it goes like this, like this, like this, and it keeps going. And so what that means is basically you plan, you design, you build, you test, you plan, you build, you design, you test. It keeps going in a circle like that. So like we said at the beginning of the project, what we're trying to do is get a ton of user stories and assign assign effort points to each of those user stories. And then sort of the project manager plans out a scope, a project timeline from there. And this project timeline is very loose, especially at the beginning of the project, because we may have 500 user stories by the end of the project. By the end, as we keep saying, there's not really any end, but by the time we envision finishing our first launchable product that we're putting out there to public, that number will probably double. So if we started with 500 user stories, we'll probably end up completing 1,000 user stories before the project launches.
Yeah. So sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, so keep in mind that we basically plan our iterations, which is basically 1 week's worth of work. Our iterations, or sprints they call them, are 1 week long. And so the product manager's job is to talk with the developers and designers on the team and decide how many effort points they can get done in a single iteration. So let's say that's 20. So then the product manager assigns out user stories that fulfill 20 effort points for that iteration. And then again, so then that's the planning stage. And then the building stage, the designers and developers work and implement their user stories. And then testing is basically when we in-house test what we did that past week. And then finally, again, which bleeds right back into planning, we demonstrate what we did the past week to the stakeholder. And so this is the stakeholder's chance to actually see and use what we did in the past week, and then say something like, okay, this is great, let's move on to the next iteration. Or, well, now that I can see this, I want this, this, and this changed. And all those change requests basically are just creating new user stories. And that's where I say, where we start out with 500 user stories, we generally end up with 1,000 user stories.
Talk about prioritization, because you mentioned having 20 points basically per iteration. One common concern I've heard from folks is are you just going to do 21 point tickets that are, really small and somewhat meaningless? Talk about how we actually prioritize the work to make sure that the important stuff gets done first.
Yeah. So in a case where we have a, there's two ways to look at this. In the case where we don't have a product yet, it doesn't really matter what order we tackle the tickets in, because if we're not launching, if at the beginning of the project we have 500 user stories and the stakeholder says we're not launching until we get these 500 user stories built out, and again that 500 will become 1,000, but okay, fine, we won't launch until we get these 500 user stories done, then it doesn't matter what order we tackle them in, because it's not going to take any longer than if we depending on the order we did it in. Now, if for whatever reason the project stakeholder has a preference, say maybe before we get to launch, they may be able to get in front of an investor and show a prototype of the application, and they need certain features working by then they can prioritize it. So what that looks like is, again, the project stakeholder is in on the meetings where we demonstrate the product, and they can see what's called the backlog, which is all the user stories we have not completed yet. So, and they can see the effort points assigned to every user story. So again, let's say our velocity for an iteration is, let's say it's 40 points. And to your point, we could fill an iteration with 41 point user stories, which would be generally very small things. But let's say the stakeholder has a preference because they have an investor meeting coming up and they want a big feature released. Well, instead of doing 40 1-point tickets, they can throw in 2 16-point tickets or user stories, and then we can fill in the rest with 8 little things. So it's up to them. At the end of the day, it's up to the stakeholder to decide the priority. Now, the only constriction on the priority is those effort points. The stakeholder can't put in 3 16-point tickets because we can't get that done in a single iteration. They can put in 2 because that's 32 total points, but they can't put in 3. So that's how we handle prioritization. Now, again, generally speaking, the stakeholder doesn't really mind until we get to that first launchable period, because it's very rare that they're going to actually be raising money before we get to anything launchable. But after we launch, then priorities really start to creep up. And so again, in this whole aspect, if you keep driving home, when you're never really finished with an app, once it's launched, you're going to start getting feedback from users. You're going to start getting new features requests. If you're doing like a B2B type app, some of your bigger clients will start demanding specific features. So that's when prioritization comes in big time. That's when the stakeholder really gets involved and says, we need to get this done. Okay, great. Perfect. We can get these big features done, and we have 40 iteration points, 40 effort points to play with. So again, if you want, we never go bigger than a 16-point ticket. If it gets to be 16 points, if it gets to be greater than 16 points, we break it into a separate user story. So again, you have these two. Let's say you have this one huge feature you need to get done. 16 points, cool. We'll get that done, and we still have 24 extra points to work with. So sometimes the stakeholder will be like, I don't care what you fill in as long as you get this one feature done, this iteration, do whatever else you want. And again, sometimes the stakeholder is more hands-on and they say, I want this, and this done, this iteration. And the only pushback we ever give is if they try to put in too many effort points. Other than that, we don't care what the priority is.
So you've slipped and mentioned tickets a couple times instead of user stories. Yes. Talk about what tickets are and how that integrates into the process.
Yeah. So for ticket is almost synonymous for a user story, and when we document our user stories by creating tickets. And so generally speaking, there's 3 types of tickets. There's a user story, there's like a chore, and there's a bug. And so we said on this show before that bugs get 0 effort points, because you're not rewarded for fixing a bug because there shouldn't have been a bug in the first place. Chores do have effort points. A chore would be something like add another server to handle the increased load we're getting on our new application. That's not like a feature. It's just something we have to do. But it does get effort points because it's not something that, it's not a bug. It's something we have to do. It's going to eat into our schedule. And so we need to actually assign effort points to that. And then there's user stories, which is what we've talked about. And again, all of these are captured in tickets and cataloged and called like a project management system. And again, we use something called Redmine. And this project management system, this is open to the project stakeholder, and the project stakeholder can go into the system at any point and generate reports, see our velocity, see what tickets we have outstanding, see what's planned for this iteration, see what's planned for next iteration, and then again, see the backlog, things that we don't have planned yet but are sitting there waiting for us to tackle.
So as we're talking about planning and mapping out iterations, as the work actually starts, what role does the stakeholder play in terms of technology decisions about what software to use, what companies to work with, as far as hosting solutions go? How does the stakeholder integrate into that process?
For us, generally not at all. Like, they're not making any. For us, the project stakeholder is basically hiring us to be their complete IT department, to be like their R&D department, their IT department, whatever you want to call it. That's what they're hiring us to do. And they have veto power. So for example, we can say, hey, listen, we're, number one, we would never really take a project where the stakeholder says you have to build this on Microsoft Azure. I don't think we've ever, because we are just experts in AWS technology. So it would be kind of just a weird mismatch if the stakeholder didn't take advantage of our expertise in that area. But what I'm saying is basically, we tell the stakeholder we are an AWS shop. We host all our stuff on AWS. And these are the technologies we use on AWS. If the stakeholder, for whatever reason, had a problem with that, we probably wouldn't work with them in the first place, because that would just be an inefficiency from the beginning. However, what their role is, if we say, listen, we are noticing spikes in traffic we're noticing spikes in traffic, and traffic is slowly getting heavier and heavier. We recommend investing in 3 other servers, for example, to get this traffic down. This could avoid problems. And that's going to cost $2,000 a month, or whatever that number is. The stakeholder can say, no, I don't want to pay that. Or just not right now. We don't have that in the budget, which that's fine. We're going to do, in that case, we're going to make do with what we can. But that's usually what the stakeholder has is veto power. And they're generally never saying, no, don't use Node, don't build a progressive web application. They're usually not, they usually know that they are hiring us as a full service agency. And like I said, almost like a department within their company.
So you mentioned the testing aspect of the week-to-week work. How does the client actually get in there and test the application out?
Yeah, so this is actually a big point here. And so obviously cost is an issue for every project we've done. We've never done a project where it's just like you have infinite budget. Never has that happened. And so QA is an interesting aspect of that budget, because QA can get expensive. It can get really expensive. If we bring on one of our QA teams, that's a significant portion of the budget. So basically, there's that option where we have a full QA team. We offer a full QA team to the client, or we have this situation where developers are QAing their own work, which is never bulletproof at all. There's something called automated testing, which of course is part of the process. However, automated testing is like using really good oil inside your vehicle. Like, it's a nice thing to do, and it'll prevent some problems, but it's certainly not going to catch everything. So developer testing is where, not through automation testing, you actually go through as the developer and act as the user and use what you've just built to try to catch bugs. Sort of exactly what the QA team would do, but the QA team is not familiar with the code that was actually written. In the situation where the developer QAs, we basically say also to the client, you are responsible for QA, because we know from experience that developer QA is never sufficient. So in that case, great, client A, you want to save budget by not having us bring on a full QA team, then you've got to be responsible for QAing every iteration, the stuff that we're building. And here's the process for QAing. Here's how you report bugs. Here's how you implement change requests. And that's one way, again, if a client is long on time and short on budget, that they can juggle the differential between the two and contribute toward the project without adding more direct budget to the project.
Well, and QA is also basically as good as the user stories are. It sort of gets back to the importance of having good user stories so that developers and the QA team know what to test to make sure that something is fixed or implemented.
Right. So the quintessential example I use for that is a very simple one. Like as a user, I want to create an account so that I can use the application. That's a pretty lame user story because there's so many different ways you can go about implementing that. Do you need to have a password to create an account? Do you have to have an email address to create an account? Do you have to have a phone number to create an account? Do you have to live within the United States? Do you have to provide a license number to register an account? Do you have to verify your email address to create an account? Do you have to verify your phone number to create an account? These are all things that, like, left out, basically leave it to the discretion of the developer to fill in the gaps as they see fit. And so this leads into an interesting discussion where the stakeholder will, let's use that example. The stakeholder says this user story is, as a user, I want to create an account so I can use the app. So the developer goes and creates this registration system where the user provides an email address and a password, and they're off using the application. And so then the stakeholder creates bugs and says it's a bug because the app isn't asking for my first and last name. No, that's not a bug. That's now a feature because you didn't request that during the normal user story. And so this is when, and again, this is why user stories take a long time to generate, because we will ask those questions during planning meetings and such. Like that one with about the user registration. We know, as we've been there before, to ask, well, do we have to confirm the email address? Do you want a phone number? Do you want a first name, last name? Is the first name, last name required? We know to ask all those things now. However, one of the things about software development is we're generally building new things. And so sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And it's then incumbent upon the stakeholder to be as specific as possible when generating these user stories to not only save time, but also to increase the amount of work we can get done from iteration to iteration.
Yeah, that's sort of the utmost importance. It's really the end game is having really good user stories and leveraging the expertise that the stakeholder has. Like you said, in many cases, they've been doing this for years and years, and they're bringing us on board because they realize that technology can help them, grow their business exponentially more. So, I guess what final thoughts do you have in terms of the actual work aspect of building the app out for entrepreneurs?
Well, so the one thing about the importance of user stories is a really good set of user stories also has another benefit, in so much that when we take members from our team and create a QA team, again, they're not familiar by design with the code that's written. So if there aren't really defined user stories, the QA team is left to their own accord to create what's called a testing plan. If the user stories are really, really good, that'll be their testing plan without them having to create their own. So they can go through step by step and verify user stories without having to guess whether that should be allowed or should not be allowed. So that's another big part of the building process. The other thing is like you said, and to just kind of toot our own horn here, this is why we've decided what you've talked about, and this kind of getting on the same page with the stakeholder, because that's what makes the difference between it. That's what can make the difference between a successful project and a failure, is understanding the communication flow, the idiosyncrasies that go into working with a software development team. So again, imagine you're the stakeholder and you're helping generate these user stories, and then the development team is building these user stories, and you're saying these are bugs, the development team saying these aren't bugs because you weren't specific. It can lead to tension. It can really lead to tension. And so that's why we came up with this idea to do the first 30 days free. Just so you can get all this. When you're not paying, you can work out the kinks and you don't get frustrated. As the stakeholder, you can be like, you know what? I think they should have understood what I was saying without me saying it, but I didn't say it. And hey, I'm not paying for this, so got it, noted. I'll make sure I'm more specific in the future. I see how you guys work now. You see how I work. And so that was really the impetus for this 30 free days, is to work out all these kinks when there's no risk involved. So there's no, once money gets involved, emotion gets involved. And that's when tensions can boil over. But if you're running like a smooth operation, you're just going down the tracks and just really knocking out feature after feature, and you can crank out an application or a number of feature sets very quickly if you guys are on the same page and working toward that same goal with the same mindset.
Yeah, that free 30 days has really been a huge difference maker. So anyone out there, any entrepreneurs or anyone really who has an app idea that they want to get built, make sure to get in touch with us and get that free 30 days where we can sort of work through, in some cases, actually completely build your idea. So definitely don't hesitate to get in touch with us. But that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Gunner Technology Livestream. Make sure to tune in next Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. You can check out the blog post for this episode at gunnertech.com. The podcast is on iTunes. Our ebooks are on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, iBooks. What's the one I forget? Kobo, and anywhere else ebooks are sold. You can hop on our Facebook page and enter the Country Store giveaway. Country Store is a lifestyle brand for anyone who loves the outdoors. Visit them at countrystoreoutfitters.com. And while you're on our Facebook page, answer our question of the week, which this week, Cody, remind them what that question is.
Have you quit Facebook, or do you have plans to quit Facebook? Log on to Facebook.
I was just going to say, hop on Facebook and answer that question. There might be a flaw in this. Do you know anyone who's quit Facebook, maybe?
That's a good one. That's a good one. But we do. You can respond to the poll directly from our newsletter and things like that. So you don't have to go to Facebook to answer it. So
okay, so you have other mechanisms. So answer that poll via our newsletter if you are not on Facebook. But if you are on Facebook, answer on Facebook or anywhere else that you want to answer it. And make sure to tune in next Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for the next episode of the Gunner Technology Livestream. I'm Derry. That's Cody. We'll see you next week.